The sun was slowly beginning to set behind the White House, casting a golden glow over the manicured lawns and meticulously arranged gardens. The day had been long, full of meetings, press briefings, and non-stop conversations about policy, national security, and the president's latest Twitter storms. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary under President Donald Trump, had grown accustomed to the pressure. Her job was never easy, and the weight of the responsibility often left her feeling drained. Today, however, something was different. The usual hustle and bustle of the West Wing seemed to fade into the background as she stepped out into the garden for a brief moment of peace. She needed a break. The cool evening air felt refreshing against her skin, and she allowed herself to take a deep breath, gazing up at the sky as the clouds parted to reveal the fading sunlight. But then, as she walked along the garden path, she heard it. A soft sound, almost muffled by the rustling leaves. It was the unmistakable sound of a child crying. At first, Karoline hesitated. She wasn't accustomed to seeing children in the White House gardens. The only young ones she typically encountered were the first family's children. But this cry, this was different. It wasn't the playful noise of a child enjoying the space, but the raw, heart-wrenching sobs of someone who seemed to be in pain. She followed the sound, her curiosity pulling her toward a small, secluded area at the far end of the garden. The tall hedges shielded the space from the usual bustle of White House activities. As Karoline rounded the corner, she saw him. A young boy, no older than 10, sitting on the grass with his face buried in his hands. It took her a moment to recognize him. The boy had dark hair, a sharp resemblance to his father, Elon Musk, the tech mogul and billionaire. Karoline had met Elon a few times during briefings and at events, but she had never seen his son like this. She knelt down beside him, her professional demeanor slipping away as concern for the child took over. "Hey," she said softly, her voice calm and reassuring. "Are you okay?" The boy sniffled, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand before slowly looking up at her. His eyes were red from crying, and there was an intensity in his gaze that spoke volumes about the weight he seemed to carry for someone so young. "I don't want to go back to the house," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "It's too lonely there. Nobody listens to me." Karoline's heart sank. She had no idea what was going on in this child's life, but the pain in his voice was undeniable. She could sense that there was much more beneath the surface of his words, something that had been bothering him for a long time. "Hey, it's okay," she said gently, sitting down beside him on the grass. "Sometimes people feel like that, like they're alone. But you're not alone, all right? You can talk to me if you want to. What's going on? Why don't you want to go back to the house?" The boy paused for a long moment, as if weighing whether he should trust her with his feelings. Finally, he looked up at her, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared. Scared of being forgotten." Karoline felt the weight of his words like a punch to the gut. It was a fear she had never expected to hear from the young son of one of the most famous men in the world. Elon Musk, the man who was constantly in the media, constantly under the spotlight. His son, a child still so young, was already carrying the heavy burden of feeling invisible. "Why do you feel that way?" Karoline asked, her voice filled with empathy. The boy looked down at his hands, his small fingers picking at the grass. Because everyone is so busy. Daddy's always working. Mommy's always with him. I'm just here. I don't know who I am." Her heart twisted in sympathy. She knew the pressures of public life. She dealt with it every day in the White House. But hearing this boy, Elon Musk's son, speak about being lost in the shadow of his father's empire struck a chord deep within her. Karoline sat there with him for a few moments, letting the silence settle between them. She didn't want to rush him. Sometimes words weren't necessary, but eventually, she found herself speaking again. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes it's easy to forget that people need more than just attention. They need love. They need people to be there for them. Not just in the big moments, but in the quiet moments, too." The boy looked up at her, his eyes wide with curiosity. "You think I'm important?" Karoline smiled warmly, her heart aching for him. "Absolutely. You're important. You matter and you always will. No matter what's going on around you, you deserve to be seen and heard. Tears welled up in his eyes again, but this time, they seemed to be a mixture of relief and gratitude. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't alone with his thoughts. Karoline was there, listening, and he could feel the comfort of her presence. But before she could say anything else, a voice called out from behind them, startling both of them. "X, there you are. We've been looking everywhere for you." It was Elon Musk, his voice tinged with concern but also a hint of frustration. Karoline stood up and turned to face him, her expression softening. Elon walked over, his eyes immediately falling on his son. "What's going on here?" he asked, his gaze briefly flicking to Karoline. "He's just been having a tough time," Karoline explained, her tone gentle but firm. "It seems like he's been feeling a bit lost." Elon's expression softened, though there was still an undercurrent of tension in his posture. He crouched down to his son's level and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, buddy," Elon said quietly, his voice not quite as sharp as it had been before. "I didn't realize you were feeling this way. We've been so focused on everything going on with work and the company. I didn't mean to make you feel forgotten." The boy looked up at his father, his eyes still filled with unshed tears. "I don't want to be alone anymore, Daddy. I don't want to be just another thing on your schedule." Karoline felt her heart break for the young boy once again. She knew that Elon Musk had his own pressures, but the pain in his son's words was impossible to ignore. Elon paused, clearly moved by his son's confession. He reached for X's hand and pulled him into a hug. "I promise I'll do better, son. I'll be there for you more. I'll listen." As father and son stood in the garden, a rare moment of connection unfolding between them, Karoline took a step back, giving them space. She couldn't help but think of her own family, of how sometimes people got lost in the hustle of life and forgot the most important thing: the people they loved. The moment between father and son felt like a small victory, but it was also a reminder. No matter how successful, how powerful, or how famous you were, the most important thing in life was always going to be the people who mattered to you. Karoline watched quietly from a distance as Elon Musk held his son, X, in an embrace that seemed so tender it almost appeared foreign to the world they inhabited. She had witnessed countless powerful figures over the years, each of them grappling with their own versions of success and sacrifice. But seeing Elon Musk, a man known for his technological achievements and his vast empire, vulnerable in this quiet moment with his son, brought a new perspective. It wasn't power, but connection, that seemed to matter most here. X, still clinging to his father, looked up and wiped his eyes, his small face still contorted with emotion. "You promise, Daddy?" he asked, his voice fragile and small, as if testing the sincerity of his father's words. Elon's grip tightened around his son, a moment of softness in an otherwise hard-edged world. "I promise, X. I'm gonna try harder. I don't want you to feel like this again. I'll be more present. I'll make time for you, for us." Karoline's heart softened as she watched the exchange. She had seen many family dynamics throughout her time working in politics, but it was moments like these that reminded her how often the lives of children became entangled in the ambitions and burdens of their parents. It was clear that Elon had so much to give: his intellect, his innovations, his drive to change the world. But in that moment, what mattered most was that he had a son who just wanted to be seen. "I think he just needs to know that you're here," Karoline said gently, taking a step toward them. Elon looked up at her, his expression one of deep gratitude mixed with lingering concern. "I know," Elon replied softly, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been so caught up in everything. I don't even know how it got this far." Karoline smiled, recognizing the burden of guilt in his voice. She knew the weight of juggling professional and personal life all too well. It was one thing to be constantly in the public eye, dealing with the scrutiny of the press, but it was another thing entirely to navigate the pressures of being a parent, especially when your child had to grow up in the shadow of your ambitions. "It happens," Karoline said with a shrug. "It's not easy to balance it all, but being present for him, especially now, will make a world of difference." Elon nodded, still holding X close, as if to reassure himself that everything would be okay. He glanced over at Karoline, offering a faint smile of appreciation. "Thank you. I'm not sure what I would have done without you here." Karoline waved it off, feeling uncomfortable with the attention. She wasn't here for praise. She was just doing what anyone would do in her place. She knew the world of power and influence could be a cold and isolating one, but in moments like these, when people were able to find genuine human connection, it felt as though they could weather any storm. "Of course," Karoline said. "I'm just glad I could be here when you needed it. Family should always come first." X, still wrapped in his father's arms, slowly began to calm down. The tears had stopped, but his eyes remained wide with uncertainty. Karoline could see the emotional distance in him, the need for reassurance, the desire to feel that he wasn't invisible in the eyes of his parents. She could feel a flicker of empathy for the boy, knowing all too well how it felt to be overshadowed by something or someone larger than life. "I think," Karoline said slowly, taking a seat on a nearby stone bench, "that what matters most is you know you're loved, X. And your dad? He loves you more than anything. I can see it." X glanced at her, his tear-streaked face softening slightly. "You think so?" he asked quietly, still unsure but clinging to the hope in her words. "I do," Karoline assured him. "I've seen a lot of things in this world, and when it comes down to it, love is the one thing that keeps us all going. You matter, and you always will." Elon, his hand still resting gently on his son's back, seemed to gather himself. His gaze moved from Karoline to X, and there was a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, when Karoline saw something shift in his eyes. It wasn't just the guilt or the pressure that had once clouded his expression. It was a realization, something deeper. Perhaps he hadn't been entirely present, but in that moment, he knew what had to change. "You're right," Elon said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "I've been so focused on work, on the mission, but that's no excuse. I'm gonna make sure that you always know how much you mean to me, X. No matter what." X nodded slowly, his eyes still unsure but beginning to brighten. "Thanks, Daddy." For a long moment, the three of them sat there in silence, the evening air cooling around them. It was a simple moment, one that could have easily been overlooked in the grand scheme of things. But Karoline knew it was the most important thing to happen in that garden today. "I'm going to head back to the house," Elon said eventually, standing up and extending a hand to his son. "But I'll make sure to spend more time with you tonight. Maybe we can go outside and look at the stars. Just the two of us?" X's face lit up at the suggestion. "That sounds awesome." Karoline smiled softly as father and son walked toward the mansion, their connection now stronger than before. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Balancing the demands of a global empire and being a present parent was no small feat, but at least now, Elon had taken the first step in realizing what truly mattered as they disappeared into the distance. Karoline couldn't help but reflect on her own relationships, her own family. In a world where the noise of ambition and success often drowned out the quiet whispers of the heart, she realized that perhaps the most powerful thing anyone could ever achieve wasn't a billion-dollar company or a presidency, but the ability to show up for the ones they loved. She stood up, her thoughts momentarily drifting. Her job at the White House was demanding, but it was moments like these that reminded her of the bigger picture, the human connection that transcended politics and power. It was a lesson she would carry with her, even in the toughest of times. The following days felt oddly quiet for Karoline. The White House, as always, buzzed with activity. But somehow, after witnessing Elon Musk's vulnerable moment with his son, X, she found herself reflecting more on her own relationships and the intricate, often unspoken burdens that came with being in the public eye. Her role as White House press secretary was demanding. No matter how much she tried to balance her professional life with her personal life, the demands of the job often left little space for the quiet moments that truly mattered. Yet, seeing Elon Musk struggle with his own family responsibilities had put everything into perspective. It was one of those rare instances when the powerful figures she interacted with on a daily basis were humanized in a way that left a lasting impression. The next morning, after the press briefing and a series of calls regarding national security, Karoline found herself walking toward the same garden where she had encountered X. She needed a moment of calm, a break from the relentless cycle of work. As she strolled through the garden, Her mind drifted back to her brief conversation with Elon, and his son.it had been a fleeting exchange, but it had shaken her more than she expected. The sight of Elon, the billionaire tech mogul, sitting on the ground with his son, his usual steely demeanor replaced with raw vulnerability, was something she would never forget. In that moment, Elon wasn't the man who revolutionized electric vehicles or sought to colonize Mars. He was simply a father trying to make things right, realizing that the most important mission in life was to connect with his own flesh and blood. Karoline was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't notice someone walking toward her. Karoline. She turned at the sound of the familiar voice and saw Elon himself approaching. His face was more relaxed today, and the usual intensity in his eyes had softened. It was as if he, too, was carrying a new sense of awareness after their brief encounter in the garden. "Hey Elon," Karoline greeted, offering him a warm smile. "How are you doing?" He smiled back, though there was a certain weariness behind his eyes. "Better, thanks to you. X and I have had some good conversations since then. I think we're starting to understand each other better." Karoline couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It was clear that Elon was truly trying, to bridge the gap with his son. But there was still something about the whole situation that lingered with her. A child shouldn't have to feel abandoned, even if their parents' intentions were good. The pressures of success, especially at the level Elon faced every day, often consumed every waking moment. "That's really good to hear," Karoline replied. "Sometimes all a child needs is to know that their parent is truly listening, and not just hearing their words, but understanding the emotions behind them." Elon nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I've been so focused on everything else, Karoline. I've built companies, changed industries, but I've missed the most important part of being a father. I've neglected what matters most." Karoline placed a hand on her hip, feeling the weight of his words. It's easy to get caught up in that whirlwind. Everyone wants to change the world, but sometimes the most important thing you can do is change the way you show up for the people you love. They stood there for a moment in silence, the weight of their shared understanding hanging in the air. Karoline realized that Elon wasn't just speaking as a CEO, but as a man who was trying to heal the rift between himself and his son. There was an honesty in his words, a sense of vulnerability that made her see him differently. He wasn't just a man with a vision for the future. He was a father learning how to be more present in his child's life. "I guess we're all just doing our best, aren't we?" Elon said, breaking the silence. Karoline smiled softly. "Yeah, we are. And sometimes that means admitting when we've fallen short and making changes. But it's never too late to try." Elon's expression softened, and for a moment, it seemed like the heavy burden of his public life had lifted, even if just a little. "I've been so focused on changing the world, Karoline, but I need to focus on changing my relationship with my son too. He's only going to be this young once. I can't miss that." Karoline nodded in agreement. "You've got this. Just remember, it's the little moments that count. You don't have to do everything at once. You just need to show up, consistently." Elon looked at her for a moment, and there was a flicker of appreciation in his eyes. "Thank you for that," he said quietly. "It means more than you know." Before Karoline could respond, a voice called out to them from the garden entrance. It was X, running toward them with a bright smile on his face. He had a newfound energy in his step, and it was clear that the interaction with his father had lightened his mood. "Daddy!" Karoline, X called, waving enthusiastically. "Can we go see the rockets now?" Karoline laughed, her heart warmed by the sight of the boy's excitement. She had no idea what it must have felt like to grow up in such a public, intense world. But right now, it seemed as though X was simply a boy wanting to be a part of something, wanting his father's attention, wanting to be seen. Elon turned to look at his son, his face breaking into a smile that was as genuine as it was rare. "Of course, buddy. Let's go see the rockets." As father and son walked away toward the nearby SpaceX exhibit, Karoline stood there for a moment, watching them. There was something deeply moving about the way Elon was trying to make up for lost time, something that struck a chord within her own heart. She had witnessed the power of ambition and success firsthand, but she had also seen the importance of family, of nurturing those relationships that grounded you. As she continued her walk through the garden, Karoline felt a sense of peace wash over her. There were so many things she still had to do, so many responsibilities and tasks to juggle. But seeing Elon and X in this new light had reaffirmed something within her. That the connections we make, the relationships we nurture, were what truly defined our success in the end. A few days later, Karoline found herself at another press briefing, the usual whirlwind of cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. Yet, her mind kept drifting back to the garden, to that quiet moment between Elon and his son, X. Even as the words flowed from her mouth in the usual cadence of political discourse, her thoughts remained elsewhere. There was a part of her that couldn't let go of the idea of family, the subtle but profound connections between people that didn't require grand gestures, only the simple act of showing up. After the briefing, Karoline received a text from Elon. It was short, but it gave her pause. "I'd like to talk. Can we meet soon? I think it's time for a real conversation." She hadn't expected to hear from him again, at least not in such an earnest way. The weight of his words hit her. A real conversation. She knew this was more than just a casual chat. This was something important. A shift had happened in him, and she couldn't help but feel that she had played a small part in it. That afternoon, she agreed to meet him at one of the quieter spaces on the estate. The location was far from the public eye, tucked away behind the thick hedges and sprawling trees of the garden. Karoline arrived early, her mind swirling with curiosity. What did Elon want to discuss? Was this about his son, or was there something more? When she arrived, she saw Elon standing by the fountain, his back to her. His posture was different from the usual corporate CEO stance. His shoulders were slightly slouched, and he appeared deep in thought. It wasn't the Elon she was used to. "Hey, Elon," Karoline called softly as she approached. He turned, his expression a mixture of weariness and contemplation. "Karoline," he greeted, his voice carrying a heaviness she hadn't expected. "Thanks for meeting me. I know you're busy." She shrugged, walking toward him. "It's fine. You seemed like you needed to talk. What's going on?" Elon ran a hand through his hair, his eyes clouded with something he hadn't been willing to share before. He gestured toward the stone bench near the fountain. "I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About X. About work. About how all of it seems to collide in a way I didn't anticipate." Karoline sat down beside him, sensing the gravity in his tone. There was something else here. Something deeper than just the usual pressurized conversation about family or business. This felt personal. "I've spent so much of my life focused on pushing boundaries," Elon continued, staring at the flowing water. "I thought that if I built a legacy, if I achieved enough, it would make everything better. But I've realized now that no matter what I accomplish, it doesn't replace the time I've missed with my family, especially with X." Karoline could see the vulnerability in his eyes now, the raw honesty that was so seldom allowed to shine through in his public persona. She could sense the conflict within him, the desire to be a better father, to repair the rift, and yet the weight of his responsibilities pulling him in 1,000 different directions. "I can't fix the past," Elon said quietly, "but I need to try harder now. I need to stop being consumed by everything else and just be present. For X. For my family." Karoline felt a lump form in her throat. The Elon Musk in front of her was not the same person she had encountered during their first meeting. This was a man who was beginning to understand the weight of his actions, not just as a visionary entrepreneur, but as a father. It was humbling to witness. "You don't have to fix everything at once," Karoline said softly, her voice steady but warm. "It's about showing up piece by piece. That's how trust is built again. You've already made the first step by realizing it." Elon nodded, the edges of his lips turning slightly upward in a tired smile. "I just don't want to keep making the same mistakes. I've been so lost in my work. I've neglected the things that truly matter." "Maybe you can start by showing X that he's not invisible," Karoline suggested. "Children need more than just the promise of love. They need to feel it in the small, everyday moments, not just the grand gestures." Elon turned to her, his gaze intense yet grateful. "I don't know what I would have done without your advice, Karoline. Honestly, I've had so many people tell me what I should do, but no one has actually helped me figure out how. Karoline smiled, her heart softened by his sincerity. It's not about knowing everything. It's about being willing to learn. No one expects you to be perfect. You just have to show that you care. That's the most important thing. Elon leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. You're right. Maybe I've been so focused on the big picture that I've missed what matters in the day-to-day. Maybe it's time I changed my approach, not just at work, but in life. They sat in silence for a while, watching the water ripple in the fountain. For a moment, Karoline could see the shift in Elon. Not just in his words, but in the way he carried himself. He wasn't just the tech billionaire anymore. He was a father, trying to piece together the broken moments of the past. I'll start with X, Elon said finally, breaking the silence. I'll be there for him, even in the small moments. I won't let work come between us anymore. Karoline nodded in understanding. And remember, it's okay to lean on others for support. It's not a weakness, it's a strength. Elon looked at her with a newfound appreciation. Thank you, Karoline. You've really helped me see things in a new light. As they stood and prepared to leave, Karoline couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This wasn't just a conversation about family or work. It was about growth, about healing, and about finding a balance between the competing demands of success and the quiet, unspoken moments that define true happiness. When she walked back toward her car, Karoline reflected on everything she had learned from this encounter. It wasn't just Elon who had changed. She had learned something too, that sometimes the greatest act of leadership wasn't in pushing the boundaries of technology or politics. It was in helping someone reconnect with what truly mattered. The following weeks passed quickly, yet Karoline couldn't help but feel the weight of the conversations she had had with Elon. Every interaction at the White House, every briefing, every public statement seemed to reflect a small change within her own perspective. It was as though something had shifted in her, deep within her soul. She had always been driven, always committed to her work. But seeing the way Elon had been trying to reforge his relationship with his son, X, and hearing the raw honesty in his words had reminded her of the importance of connection. The ties that bound people together, even amidst chaos. One afternoon, as Karoline sat at her desk, reviewing some press materials, she received an unexpected message. It was from Elon Musk again. But this time, the tone was different. There was an element of hope and warmth that hadn't been present before. Karoline, I wanted to let you know something. X and I have been spending a lot more time together. I've been present in ways I never thought I could be. We've been talking, laughing, even making silly jokes together. I just wanted to thank you. You gave me the courage to face what I had been avoiding. Karoline smiled as she read the text. She felt a sense of deep fulfillment knowing that her brief words of advice had helped him on such a personal level. She had given him something that was more valuable than any political speech or strategic recommendation. She had given him the tools to reconnect with his son. The next day, Karoline was at another briefing, as usual, facing the reporters, the flashbulbs, and the pressure of the spotlight. But today felt different. She felt more grounded, more centered. It was as though the brief encounter with Elon Musk, and the lessons she had taken away from it, had given her a renewed sense of clarity. The demands of her job, though relentless, seemed less intimidating, somehow. Her personal life, though still complex, felt a bit more manageable. After the briefing, as she walked through the corridors of the White House, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Elon. Karoline. His voice came through, full of warmth and gratitude. I just wanted to share something with you. Of course, she said, smiling as she walked to her office. What's going on? It's X, Elon began. He came to me yesterday, and he said something that took me completely by surprise. He told me he was proud of me. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally getting it right. Karoline's heart softened at the sound of Elon's voice. That's amazing, Elon. I'm really happy to hear that. He let out a quiet laugh. You know, it's not about big, grand gestures. It's about showing up consistently, being there. X just needed to know that I was present, that I was here, no matter how busy I get. Karoline nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She had learned the same lesson in her own way. It's always the small moments that matter most, the ones that don't make the headlines. Elon was quiet for a moment, as if reflecting on her words. Then he spoke again, his voice tinged with a deep sincerity. I never would have gotten here without you, Karoline. You've been a light in the middle of all the chaos. I just wanted to thank you for helping me see what really matters. Karoline's eyes glistened, and for a moment, she felt the weight of the moment settle deep inside her. You've done the hard work, Elon. I just helped you see what was already inside you. They both fell silent, the gravity of their conversation settling between them like a quiet understanding. Karoline realized then that, in some ways, the change she had witnessed in Elon had mirrored her own personal transformation. His vulnerability, his willingness to admit he had made mistakes, and his determination to make things right had inspired her to reflect on her own life in a deeper way. The importance of family, of nurturing relationships, was something that transcended the political world in which they both operated. That evening, Karoline received a message from Elon's assistant, inviting her to a private gathering at the SpaceX headquarters. It was an informal event, just a small group of close friends and colleagues. As she arrived at the venue, she was greeted by a warm, familiar atmosphere. Elon and X were there, along with a few other guests, enjoying a casual evening together. When Elon saw her, he waved enthusiastically. Karoline, I'm so glad you could make it. She smiled, walking over to him. Of course, it's nice to finally see the Musk family enjoying a little downtime. X, who had grown noticeably more relaxed and open since their first meeting, bounced up to her with a huge smile. Karoline, come see the rockets. I've been showing everyone my favorite ones. Karoline laughed, bending down to his level. I'd love to, X. Lead the way. As they walked over to the display, Karoline couldn't help but notice the way Elon and X interacted. The walls that had once seemed so insurmountable between them were slowly being dismantled, one small conversation at a time. It wasn't just about the rockets or the flashy achievements. It was about a father and son finding their way back to each other. The connection between them felt real, no longer driven by expectations, but by mutual respect and love. After a while, as the evening wound down, Elon found Karoline standing by the window, looking out at the stars. He approached her quietly, his expression thoughtful. Karoline, I don't know where I'd be without this new perspective. X and I have started to rebuild what I never thought could be fixed. And it's all because of that conversation we had. I just wanted to say, thank you. She turned to him, a soft smile playing on her lips. You did the hard work, Elon. You're the one who decided to make the change. All I did was remind you of what was already inside you. Elon nodded, his face reflecting gratitude and a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. Well, that may be true, but I'll never forget what you did for me. You helped me see that family, relationships, those are the things that truly matter. Everything else is just noise. Karoline's heart swelled as she watched Elon, standing there with his son, finally finding the peace and fulfillment he had long sought. In that moment, she knew that this journey they had been on, through personal growth, vulnerability, and healing, was one they would carry with them forever. And just like that, Karoline felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that in the quietest moments of our lives, the ones that go unnoticed by the world, the most profound changes can occur.